Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys about a topic that a viewer brought up the other day. They're like, hey, why are you talking about using slow linear progression for even intermediate and advanced lifters when you've also talked in the past about the law of adaptation? Isn't this a potential conflict? Isn't this a potential conflict? Because the law of adaptation basically states that you're going to get about 3 workouts of using the exact same training stimulus before you probably will no longer grow from that stimulus and no longer make further positive adaptations. What we mean with that by a training stimulus, let's use the bench press as an example. You can pick any exercise, pick the bench press, America's favorite exercise. If you pause bench 3 sets of 8 reps with 225 pounds, with a similar pause, a similar cadence, similar rep speed, more than about 3 weeks straight, you will stop growing and adapting to it. In other words, you will most likely max out your body's adaptation to that specific training stimulus. Now, this was discovered originally by the Russians back during the Cold War, and that's the reason linear block periodization runs things in 3-week blocks. Now, that's also the reasons that guys like Louis Simmons, who also talks a lot about the law of accommodations, and guys at Westside Barbell are continually rotating through things. For those familiar with the Westside Conjugate method, they run their speed work, their dynamic effort work in 3-week waves. And then they change it, meaning they might run 3 weeks with bands, then they switch to chains for 3 weeks. Now, they take their max effort exercises and they rotate those every week, and they don't ever repeat the same max effort lift more than once every 6 weeks. That's how they run things to bypass the law of adaptation. Again, that law that you're going to get about 3 workouts or 3 weeks, assuming you're not replicating the same workout multiple times in a week, because we oftentimes rotate through things, that if you're not changing your training stimulus after 3 weeks, you're going to stagnate in those particular muscles, on those exercises, things like that. So how do we reconcile that with slow linear progression? Because we also have world record holders like Dan Green, who coaches even natties, even his natty guys. He coaches them using sometimes this and talks about it. So how do we reconcile that? If you take a guy like him, the guy looks like a bodybuilder, and he's a world champion power lifter, raw power lifter, who talks a lot about, well, if you just make all these muscles bigger, you'll be stronger. Bigger quads equals bigger squat. Bigger triceps and pecs equals bigger bench. So he's one of those guys. He actually is all about not having any weak points in your body, that holistic training, all of that. And he looks at when you see the guy. Now, that being said, how do we reconcile that? Well, what people need to understand, when we're trying to bypass the law of adaptations, we're worried about this for very, very serious top-level lifters who are wanting to make the most rapid progress possible. All right? Doesn't mean you're not going to progress if you go longer than 3 weeks and then you switch something out or try to add things. That's not what it means. We'll get to that in a minute. What that means is that stagnation doesn't let you improve at anything, and by rotating through exercises, rotating through rep ranges, rotating through volume and intensity every 3 weeks, to bypass this, you don't ever feel like you're stagnating. Your body will always be adapting. But the thing that you also have to remember, you will also detrain over time some of the previous blocks. So then when you go back through and hit those again, you'll readapt and move forward. Now, what we need to remember is that part of this is psychological in nature, in the sense that oftentimes very driven, very serious lifters need to feel like they are making continual progress. And we all know advanced lifters don't make continual progress. We know that. They don't make continual progress. Doesn't happen. But if they're rotating through different waves and blocks, they always feel like they're improving week to week. For a lot of lifters, that can be a very, very important psychological tool, because they're always moving forward, always adapting. Now, the other thing to factor in is because they're always rotating through stuff, in some cases, that can prevent overuse injuries, but it prevents overuse injuries only because of rotating through exercises and stimulus, so that they don't get overuse injuries, but also because people are always continually trying to progress. They're always pushing their limits. They're always pushing their limits. So what we need to factor in there is that when you're working with a training system to try to bypass this law of adaptations, your point is to make rapid progress as rapidly as possible. Sometimes you need to keep in mind that might only be 5% faster progress. And oftentimes this is done for psychological reasons. Just like I tell guys, body part splits are done for psychological reasons, not physiological reasons. There's no physiological benefit to that, but there can be psychological ones. To avoid staleness. Well, doing this sort of thing can avoid staleness too, because you're not beholden to the law of adaptations if you're changing stuff every 3 weeks, so that you can always see progression because you changed a rep range or you changed an exercise variation or something of that nature, so that you always feel like you're making progress. All right, that can be psychological in nature. It doesn't mean linear progress isn't still possible. All right, you need to understand that. Let's say you're using that bench press and that's the protocol you've done. And you've done that for 3 weeks straight and you're no longer adapting. Does that mean that you're stuck? No. It means that you also have the option, what if you want to do it for 4 weeks? What if you want to do it for 5 weeks? You might not grow during those extra 2 weeks. You might not grow significantly. But you still have the option of changing the training stimulus, of maybe focusing on a longer pause or a more explosive lift. Meaning, if you did 3 sets of 8 with that weight and you recovered, it's going to get easier over the course of the 3 weeks too. It should be getting easier. Well, here's the thing. If you work with the same weight and reps pretty regularly on the same exercise, it will start to get easy. So if you do it for a while and you don't progress, you are still getting very, very good at that exercise. You're still building motor pathways. You're maintaining those motor pathways. Here's the thing. People who don't do the changes all the time and they say, you know what, okay, maybe I stopped adapting at 3 weeks. I could push it a week or 2 longer with the same training protocol. Now, a lot of people say they're going to make slower gains. Yeah, they might. But they're also going to have less overuse injuries. They're also going to need to deload less often, because what ends up happening, it's the continual pushing that forces us to need to deload. So what happens if you do the same training stimulus until it becomes easy? You become comfortable with it. That will, if done for a little time, in a way simulate a deload. So what you actually find is that if someone were to do very slow linear progression and only add weight or reps or advance on their actual progression when they are comfortable with it, yeah, they'll progress a little bit slower, but they won't stop progressing. They can just be comfortable. They can wait till they're comfortable with that given training stimulus. And if they do that, they're not going to need to deload as often. They're not going to get as many injuries. They're not going to get as sore. And then when they're ready, they progress each time. That is a viable way for the advanced lifter to train. That's a viable way for the advanced lifter to train. And it also allows for people to not have to follow as hardcore of a structured program for people who have real world stresses and real problems. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that sort of training method, that's almost what I'm doing at this point, even though it seems like I'm going really fast with the system I'm using. I'm using a slow linear progression system. It just goes fast when I have a lot of strength I can easily gain in a block. But maybe slightly older lifters who don't recover quite as fast, or who are more worried about connective tissue issues, or who are going to have to worry about various daily stress, if you go through periods of time to where you maintain your sets, reps, and your training stimulus, let's say you have a really stressful week at work, or you're going through a lot of stress in your personal life and you know that you can't push your best, a training style like that actually lends itself very well to people who can't focus 100% of their life and energy into their training once they are a somewhat advanced lifter. And they want to continue to make progress over the years, or people who don't have the best recovery anymore because we're a little older, and we're advanced. A system like that allows you to do that. You can do slow linear progression. Yeah, you're going to deal with the law of accommodations. It's going to be a problem every now and then. It's going to slow you down here and there, but also You will also be potentially less injury prone. You won't need to deload as often, and you will still reach your goals. You just won't reach them quite at the lightning pace. You might make gains 10% slower that year than you could have. But in certain environments, it's totally viable. And that's one reason you do even see some champions out there, and coaches who are themselves record holders in powerlifting who have enormous amounts of muscle mass will even say, you know what, there's nothing wrong with linear progression. There's absolutely nothing wrong with linear progression. You can become brutally big and strong using it, as long as you're willing to be patient with it. And again, like I'm saying, that's sort of training for sometimes middle-aged lifters who are really trying to reach that next level over time isn't a bad approach. So there is what people need to understand when there seems to be, when discussing linear progression beyond the novice phase and the law of accommodations. There's where the potential conflict exists, but it doesn't really exist as long as you fully understand how both work and you know how to work around it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.